murder and coffee. Now, did you bring your mom this time? Maybe your dad? Either way. Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are covering George Stinney Jr. Pretty much one of the youngest people to get executed. So, let's begin. George Stinney, birthday, October 21st, 1929. Died June 16th, 1944. He was a boy who at age of 14 was wrongfully convicted and then executed and proceeding later as not guilty. He didn't do it. It was an unfair trial, the murders of two white girls between March 1944, Betty June Binnicker, age 11, and Mary Emma Tamas, age 7, in the hometown of South Carolina. He was convicted, sentenced to death, and executed by electrical chair in June 1944, thus becoming the youngest American with an exact birth date, confirmed to be both sentenced to death and executed in the 20th century. A re-examination of Stinney's case began in 2004, and several individuals at the School of Law sought a judicial review. Stinney's murder conviction was vacated in 2014, 70 years later, after he was executed with a South Carolina court ruling that he had not received a fair trial and thus wrongfully executed. So, let's talk about this guy. He stood 5'1" and weighed 90 to 95 pounds. He lived in a small town with a chicken coop in his hometown in South Carolina with his father, George Stinney Sr., mother Ann Brown Stinney, brother Charles Stinney, 12, and sisters Catherine Stinney, 10, and Amy Stinney Ruffner, 7. Stinney's father worked at the town sawmill, and the family resided in a company housing. It was a small, working-class mill town where white and black neighborhoods were separated by railroad tracks. On March 23, 1944, the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Tamas were found in a ditch on the African American side of the tracks after the girls failed to return home the night before. Stinney's father assisted in the search. The girls had been beaten with a weapon, various repeat of blunt force trauma with a part of a railroad track. Binnicker and Tamas both suffered severe blunt force trauma, resulting in both girls' skull being wrecked. The nicest way to say it. According to the report by the medical examiner, these wounds had been inflicted by a blunt instrument with a round head and about the size of a hammer. The medical examiner reported no evidence of sexual aid to the young girls. Thank you, Jeebus. I forgot to mute my phone. Let me do that. Oh, better. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles looking for flowers as they passed the Stinney's property. They had asked Stinney and his sister Amy if they knew where to find maypops, a local name for a passion flower. According to Amy, She was with Stinney at the time the police later established the murders occurred. According to the article reported, on March 24, 1944, the sheriff announced the arrest of George Junius and stated that the boy had confessed and led officers to a hidden piece of iron. Investigation! George's older brother, John, were arrested on suspicions of murdering the girls. John was released by the police. Which back in the day, when, this whole black versus white thing was going on, if anything happened to white, they blamed the blacks. If anything happened to blacks, well, it was the whites. There was no specific, maybe one of our own could have done it, Yeah. Just back then, they just assumed. Makes me also want to imagine a policeman on a horse just do. Oh, the images. Anyway, they're held in custody. He was not allowed to see his parents until after trial and conviction. According to the handwritten statement, his arrest officer was a deputy who stated, "I arrested a boy by the name of George Stinney. He then made a confession and told me where to find the piece of iron and about 15 inches where he said he put it in the ditch. About 15 inches where he said he put it in the ditch about 6 feet from the bicycle." I put it next to the rock, but it was 15 feet from that said rock, which I threw off my bicycle to the left side of the universe. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry you couldn't find it in the universe. I just threw it 15 feet the other direction. 1995, Stinney's 7th grade teacher, a black man, spoke in an interview. "I remember the day he killed those children. He got into a fight with a girl at school who was his neighbor. In those days, you didn't have to worry about children carrying guns and knives at school, but George carried a little knife, and he scratched this child with a knife. I took him outside, and we went for a little walk, and I talked to him. He went back into the school. In a submissive way, he begged for the child's pardon. Stinney's sister, Amy, denied those allegations and contacted Hamilton after it was published. Amy stated, "I asked him why he would say something like that. He told me someone paid him to say it. I don't know who paid him, but exact words were, 'because they paid me.'" Hamilton died shortly after his interview was published. Following his arrest, his father was fired from his job at the local sawmill, and the Stinney's family had immediately vacated their company housing. The family feared for their safety. His parents did not see him again after the trial. He had no support during his 81-day confinement and trial. He was detained at the jail. Stinney was questioned alone, without his parents, without an attorney. Although the Sixth Amendment guarantees legal counsel, this was not routinely observed until the United States Supreme Court in 1963. Oh, here we go with the trial, right? The entire proceeding against Stinney, including jury selection, took place April 24, 1944. Stinney's court-appointed counselor, a tax commissioner campaigning for the election to the local office, Cloud did not challenge the 3 police officers who arrested that Stinney confessed to the 2 murders, nor did he try to defend Stinney. He also did not challenge the prosecutor's presentation of 2 different versions of Stinney's verbal confession. In one version, Stinney was attacked by the girls after he tried to help one who had fallen in the ditch, and he killed them in self-defense which was the other version. He had followed the girls, first attacking Mary, and then Betty June. Oh, Lord. That's kind of funny. Because, if you didn't watch it, my last episode was Mary Bell, but I kept calling her Beth. Which, come to find out, the reason I kept calling her that, I found out after I finished the recording. I labeled the video Mary Beth before I even recorded it. So that's where that Beth came from. More Beth. Betty June. There was no written record of Stinney's confession apart from the deputy's written statement. Other than the testimony of 3 police officers at trial, prosecutors called 3 witnesses: Reverend Francis Batson, who discovered the bodies of the 2 girls, and the 2 doctors who performed the postmortem examination. The court allowed decision of the possibility of sexual A due to bruising on one of their genitals. Stinney's counsel did not call the witness, did not call cross-examination witnesses, and offered little or no defense at all. We're just here to get paid. I don't care what happened or who you did, what they did, and what they did to you. I don't care. I'm just here to get paid. That kind of stuff. The trial presented last 2.5 hours. Of course. More than 1,000 white Americans crowded the courtroom. Imagine fucking that. I swear, back in the day, would have pissed me off. Would have been really upsetting to me. It was so unfair back in the day. There was no need for that. He was tried before an all-white jury. Number 1, unfair. After deliberating for less than 10 minutes, the jury found Stinney guilty of murder. Sentenced Stinney to death by electrocution. There is no transcript of the trial. No appeal was filed by the Stinney counsel. Most of the pleas for clemency came from white women living in South Carolina. Some pleas from whites came with affirmations of white supremacy. Fabulous. Okay, some pleas from whites came from affirmation of white supremacy, but discomfort at the prospect of someone so young being executed. Others urged the governor to let the execution proceed, which he did. He visited George Stinney in the death house 2 days before the execution on June 14th. Johnston wrote a response to appeal for clemency, stating, "I have just talked with the officer who made the arrest in this case. It may be interesting for you to know that Stinney killed the smaller girl to sexually aid the bigger one." 20 minutes later, he returned and attempted to sexually aid the girl again, but her body was too cold. All of this admitted himself. He didn't. This. It was reported that these were just rumors, and the Johnson claims were not corroborated by the girls' autopsies. Duh. Between the time of Stinney's arrest and his execution, his parents were allowed to see him once after the trial, when he was held in a Colombian penitentiary. Under the threat of lynching, which is anybody getting to him or anything slipping through the cracks, all that stuff. They were not allowed to see him any other time. Stinney was executed on Friday, June 16, 1944, 7:30 a.m. He was prepared for execution by the chair, using a Bible as a booster seat. Let that sit in. He was so small, so young, that they had to put like a Bible, thick Bible, under his bootay. Not a phone book, a Bible. Just so he could reach the hat. Ooh, excuse you, hair. Get back in place. No one told you to get out of here. But he was too small for the chair. He was then restrained by his arms, legs, and body to the chair. An officer asked George if he had any last words to say before the execution took place, but he only shook his head and said, "No, sir." The executioner pulled the straps from the chair and placed it over George's mouth, causing him to break into tears, and then he placed a face mask over his face, which did not fit him, as he continued sobbing. Oof. How? Mm. When the lethal electricity was applied, the mask covering his face slipped off, revealing tears streaming down his face. This perception was later contested by a person. He said it was just a rumor that the hood had slipped and they did not put a stack of books underneath him. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Crowley. So, this was reopening of the case. When you're in law in the class, they pretty much want you to find unsolved mysteries or see if you can solve this one. See if you can help with it, understand it, what's wrong. Good practice. So, in 2004, many years later, Stater researching the case after reading a newspaper article about it. His work gained the attention of lawyers Steve McKenzie and Matt Burgess. In addition, Ray Brown, attorney James Moon, and others contributed to countless hours of research and review of historical documents and found witnesses and evidence to assist in Stinney. Those who aided the case were the Civil Rights and Restoration Justice Project, CRRJ, at the Northeastern University School of Law, which filed an amicus brief in the court in 2004, which is an individual organized who is not a party to the legal case, but who is permitted to assist by court by offering information, expertise, and insight that has been bearing on the issues in this case. That's what it means. Ferguson and pro bono lawyers first sought relief through the Pardon and Parole Board of South Carolina. McKenzie and Burgess, along with attorney Ray Chandler, representing Stinney's family, filed a motion for a new trial on October 25, 2013. If we can get the case reopened, we can go to the judge and say there wasn't any reason to convict this child. There was no evidence to present to the jury. There was no transcript. This case needs to be reopened. This is just injustice that needs to be righted. I'm pretty optimistic that if we can get the witness, we need to come forward. We will be successful in the court. We hopefully that we have witnesses that are going to say that's non-family, non-relative witnesses who is going to be able to tie all this in and say this was basically an alibi witness. They were there with Mr. Stinney and did not occur. It was by Stephen McKenzie. Pearson stated in interviews there was been a person that has been named by the culprit who is now deceased. It was said by the family that there was a deathbed confession. They're dying. I'm going to tell you this before I die. So the rumored culprit came from a well-known, prominent white family. A member of the or members of the family has served in the initial coroner's and justice jury, which however making it Stinney be prosecuted. There is compelling evidence that George Stinney was innocent of the crimes for which he was executed in 1944 for. The prosecutors relived and almost exclusively on one piece of evidence to obtain a conviction of an unsigned confession of a 14-year-old who was deprived of counsel and parental guidance, and whose defense lawyer shockingly failed to call Many witnesses are preserved the right to appeal. New evidence in the court hearing in January 2014 included testimony by Stinney's siblings that he was with them at the time of the murders. In addition, an affidavit was introduced from the Reverend Francis Batson, who found the girls and pulled them from the water-filled ditch. In the statement, he recalls that was not much blood in or around the ditch, suggesting that they may have been killed elsewhere and moved. Somebody who was in prison with Stinney testified that the teenager told him he was been made to confess and always maintained his innocence. The solicitor, who argued for the state against exoneration, who was appointed as South Carolina's first African-American Supreme Court justice since Reconstruction. Rather than approving the new trial, December 16, 2014, a judge, Carmen Mullen, vacated Stinney's conviction. She ruled that he had not received a fair trial and he is not effectively defended, and a Sixth Amendment right has been violated. The ruling was a rare use of the legal remedy. Judge Mullen ruled that his confession was likely coerced and thus cruel and unusual punishment, that his attorney failed to call witnesses and to preserve his right to an appeal. Mullen confessed her judgment to process and prosecution, noting that Stinney may well have committed this crime with reference to the legal process. No one can justify a 14-year-old child charged, tried, and convicted and executed in 80 days, concluding that, in essence, not much was done for this child when his life lay in the balance. Okay, this was just them talking to other people, pulling more witnesses or people that related, to the people back in the day, in the 1990s, if they're even still alive. Since Stinney's exoneration, the son of the wealthy white businessman had been the subject of speculation as a possible suspect of the murders. Anyways, that person died 2 and 3 years after the murder of the two girls in 1947. At age 29, Stinney's mother had worked for the Burke family for a brief period. Stinney's sister recalled that her mother had once come home saying that Burke Sr. had made advances at her, and that her father was told her mother to no longer go back.